Welcome to today's webinar by Cambridge Dream. Our topic today is independent study skills. And this is a picture of beautiful Cambridge with King's College on the right and Clare College on the left, and the River Cam, the very famous River Cam, running in front of the colleges. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a website, www.cambridgedream.com. And if you want to know any more about Cambridge Dream, our summer courses, do visit our website. So, independent study skills. By the end of today's webinar, you will understand why independent study skills are essential for university, actually not just for university, for school, for university, for future employment. And I'm sure while you're at home studying away from the school environment, you're finding that you're having to do a lot more independent study. So hopefully this webinar will be useful for you in that situation as well. We'll look at which study skills you need to develop. I'll share with you some top tips to improve your time management and motivation, both of which are really key to independent studying. You'll learn how to evaluate your personal learning style. Some of you may have done this already. If you haven't, I think you'll find that very useful. And we'll look at how to read, speak and listen more efficiently for academic purposes. Also essay writing and how to avoid plagiarism. If you don't know what plagiarism is, I will be explaining as we go through. And I'll also share with you a 7-point exam revision action plan. You may not have exams to work for at the moment, but you certainly will have in the future, and I think that would be very useful to you. And we'll finish with some questions and answers. So introducing myself, first of all, my name is Laura Davis, and I'm a graduate of Cambridge University myself. I have a bachelor's and master's degree in modern and medieval languages. In the picture, you'll see me on the left, and my husband is on the right, and my son in the middle, and we're all Cambridge graduates in different subjects. My son studied medicine, and my husband was a scientist. I'm currently the Director of Academic Summer Programmes in a Cambridge University college, and I have personally helped hundreds of high school students of many different nationalities like yourselves to reach the best fit university for them. I am a writer. I also lecture, research, I train, I occasionally teach, and I'm an entrepreneur. I've founded many businesses. So, how is studying at university level different from studying at school? Well, most obvious difference probably is less time taught in the classroom. So you'll be going to lectures with many, many other students. You'll be attending tutorials, supervisions, perhaps doing lab work, but you won't be sitting in a classroom as much as you would be at school. You'll have many competing deadlines, and that's a huge difference. You're already, I'm sure, feeling the pressure of deadlines, particularly as you're approaching the higher years in school, and you'll find that that will step up a gear when you go to university. You'll be receiving fewer instructions, certainly less detailed instructions, and you'll probably have less supervision of your work. You'll have more distractions and pressures of all kinds, emotional, financial, academic, and you'll find that unlike at school, where there's usually a right or a wrong answer and you're marked on that basis, when you get to university, there's usually not a right or wrong answer. It's more about applying your thinking process and a logical line of reasoning and reflecting on the material that you're researching to arrive at the solution that you think best reflects your thinking, and that's what you'll be marked on. You'll be following different conventions and marking structures. For example, you'll need to reference any research you do, and I'll be covering that as we go through the webinar. And you'll just need generally to take a lot more responsibility for your own learning and be self-motivated. And of course, you'll be responsible for your own time. You won't have people telling you what to do each day or every hour of the day. So you'll need to actively balance your studies and your spare time. When I speak to students after they've gone to university, maybe a term or a couple of terms after they've started, very typically they'll tell me there's just more of everything, more reading, more people to deal with, more to do, more of everything. So you'll be sort of moving up a gear in your learning and your studying. So what does independent study mean to you? I'm going to show you some words that different students have used to describe studying independently. And what you might notice if you have a look at these words is that some of them are very positive, like enjoyment, having more choice, maturity, great, and others perhaps are at the other end of the spectrum. So anxiety, stress, boredom, not enough contact time, time wasting. So what I think I'd like you to take from this is that it's an opportunity for you to take charge, take control, do things the way that suits you, make the most of your learning. But it's also daunting, it's a challenge, and every student will face challenges when they move to university. And really, it's also an opportunity for you to manage those challenges. And again, that's very much what this webinar is about today. I'll be referring as I go through the webinar to this book at the bottom of the screen by Stella Cottrell. She has written some really excellent books for students at school and at university, and this one is called the Study Skills Handbook, and it's also available online. Not the whole book, but many parts of it are freely available, so you can just go on that website, studyskillshandbook.co.uk, and you'll find a lot of the models, the questionnaires, the top tips, different techniques you can use will be on that website. So this is an exercise I would like to do with you now, and it's about self-evaluating your study skills. So we'll be showing you 15 questions which you should answer as truthfully as you can. You just need to answer yes or no to each of the 15 questions. So as we go through, the most important thing is to notice where you're saying yes. And we'll do it by topic. So the first topic is time management. So first question, I spend more time than necessary studying for what I'm learning. Yes or no? Second one, it's common for me to spend hours cramming the night before an exam. Yes or no? If I study as much as I need to, I do not have time for my social life. Do that. Next topic, concentration and motivation. Yes or no? I struggle to focus when I have the TV or radio turned on. I find it difficult to study for long periods of time without becoming distracted or tired. And number 6, I often doodle, draw, I daydream, or I fall asleep when I go to class. So have a think about that. Spend a few minutes just looking at those questions and deciding whether it's yes or no for you. So this is just a personal self-evaluation entirely for your own benefit. You don't need to share this with anyone else unless you wish to. The most important thing is really just to note where you're saying yes, because those are the areas you will need to go back and maybe spend a little bit more time managing the issue and finding out what the problem is, what's stopping you studying effectively. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. So we move on to the next set of questions, listening and note-taking. Often the notes I take during class are difficult for me to understand later when I try and review them. Yes or no? I often end up concluding the wrong material in my class notes. I do not usually review my class notes throughout the semester. Moving on to reading skills. When I get to the end of a chapter in a textbook, I struggle to remember what I have just read. Yes or no? I struggle to identify what is important in the text. I often wish that I was able to read faster. I think most people would agree with that one. So again, just spend a few minutes looking at that and seeing whether you think it's a yes or a no for you. And if it's a yes, either make a mental note or write down what it is that you're saying yes to. This document, this self-evaluation questionnaire, should have been sent to you when you registered to attend the webinar. If you haven't received it, then you can ask for a copy of it, and that's something you can go back and have a look at later, or you can revisit the recording of this webinar if you want to spend a little bit more time on this exercise. Okay, and the last one, writing skills. When my teachers assign me papers and projects, I often feel so overwhelmed that I really struggle to get started. More often than not, I write my assignments the night before they are due. And finally, I really struggle to organize my thoughts into a logical paper that makes sense. So again, just spend a moment having a look at those last 3 questions concerning writing skills and see whether you would say yes to any of those. Okay, moving on. So if you did answer yes to one or more questions in any of the categories, this is giving you a clue. This is showing you where you need to look to make improvements in your study skills in those areas. So that's an exercise for your benefit. So we'll move on now. I'm going to share with you some top tips for improving time management, because time management is a really key aspect of independent study skills. Firstly, you need to understand where your time goes. Secondly, could you use your time better? And if so, how? You could use a wall chart, a planner, a calendar, or whatever method works for you to note down your deadlines so you don't lose track of what you've got to do. You should prioritize tasks and chunk your time. We'll look at ways to prioritize tasks as we go through the webinar. I'll give you an idea of how you can approach that. And in terms of chunking your time, what we mean by that is, rather than constantly moving between different types of activities, different types of tasks, see if you can set aside chunks of time for each type of activity. So rather than constantly maybe checking your emails or checking your social media, leave that for a particular time of the day. And again, we'll look at that in a little bit more detail as we go through the webinar. Number 5, manage distractions and procrastination. We all get distractions. The secret really is how to manage those. And again, I'll give you some ideas as we move on. Procrastination, simply that just means putting things off, not doing them at the time you should be doing them. And again, I think we're all guilty of that to some extent, but it does hold you back, and it is something you need to be aware of and do your best to avoid. Have a designated study area and keep it tidy. I know that's not always easy, particularly if you're perhaps working at home and maybe you have lots of brothers and sisters who are disturbing you. But see if you can find a quiet place to do your work and make that the designated place where you will do your study. Take regular breaks. That's really important. Everyone gets tired, and if you're working for hours without a break, you will run out of steam. So take regular breaks and also eat and sleep well. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Do make time for your friends, for exercise and for hobbies. Because again, these are all really good ways of managing anxiety, stress, and just making sure that the time you do spend working is really productive and effective. Now, do you remember we said you need to understand where your time is spent, both now and possibly how you would like to change that in the future. So this is a technique for doing it. We won't actually do the exercise now, but it's something you could do later in your own time. So it's called time management circles, and at the bottom there again you can see I've quoted the studyskillshandbook.co.uk. So you can actually go on that website, you can download those particular time circles and you can print them off and do them in your own time. So on the left we've got how I use my time now, and on the right how I want to use my time. Okay, and if you look, there are 24 segments to the circle. 24 hours in the day. Now, all of us have the same number of hours in a day, and we can all use them effectively if we choose to. And that's really the point of this exercise, is to think about how you're using your time now in a normal average working day. so not at the weekend, but on a day when you would be normally studying, and how you would like to use your time if you were able to really focus and perhaps do it a little bit differently. So to give you an idea, this is an example of how one student has filled this in. So on the left, he's put in how he uses his time now. And you can see the biggest chunk with the little moons is actually sleep. So on the key, it would have said sleep time. And on the right, that's reduced. So in this particular case, the student was on average sleeping for 10 hours, but realized that wasn't all high quality sleep. And actually, he would probably be better winding down a little bit before he goes to bed, having a good 8 hours sleep, and then getting out of bed at a specific time, feeling refreshed, and then using the extra time to do other things. So in this case, less sleep, less TV, perhaps less time eating, because he was snacking a lot, more time spent thinking, reading, and exercise. So again, this is a very personal exercise to you, but it's something you might find useful if you actually sit down and look at it. And very often when we do this in our summer course, a student will say to me, I didn't realize I spent so many hours of the day on this particular activity, or that I could use the spare time I've gained to do something really interesting, rewarding, exciting, as well as working. So you could find it quite a useful exercise to do. We talked about prioritizing your work, and this is a useful technique. There are usually two ways of looking at tasks. They're either important or they're urgent, or possibly both. So what I suggest is you look at all the tasks or activities you have to do, and you rate them in column A for importance and column B for urgency. Okay, so for importance, from 6 to 10. 6 means it's really not important. 10 means I have to do this. It's absolutely essential. And in terms of urgency, 1, it's got to be done at once, and 5, it can wait. Okay, so for each task, you've got 2 columns, and you're marking it for both factors, importance and urgency. Then you subtract column B scores from column A, and you see what ratings you're left with. And those will be your priorities in order of the number, in order of the ratings. So typically the most important tasks may not be the most urgent ones, and conversely, you may have to make a phone call, but it may not be that important. It just may be urgent. So it's really about balancing the two, and it's a good way of working out how to prioritize, how to put things in the order in which you should do them. Now, we talked about distractions a moment ago, and distractions are something I think everybody faces. We don't have always total control of our environment. People come up to us, our phone rings, emails pop in on our laptop or our phones. And it's really more a case of how do you minimize and manage those distractions. So the reason that's important is distractions lower our productivity and increase our stress. Research has shown this time and again. So for example, it takes an average of about 25 minutes to return to a task after an interruption. Gloria Mark is a researcher in digital distraction, would you believe there is such a thing, at the University of California, Irvine. And she has worked out that it takes an average of about 25 minutes. But other research and other studies have shown something similar. It takes a lot longer than you think, actually, to refocus on a task after an interruption. And another way of looking at this is Adams' equity theory, which was developed by John Stacey Adams, who's a behavioral psychologist. And what he discovered through his research was that people become demotivated if they feel as though their inputs are greater than their outputs. So in terms of study, for example, your inputs might be your skill, your hard work, your knowledge, your focus, your energy, the sacrifices perhaps that you've made to get on with your work. And your outputs will be the grades, the praise, the feedback, the sense of achievement, perhaps a place at your university of first choice. So What this is saying is that if you feel as though you're putting in a lot more than you're getting out, you will become demotivated. So really what you should be focusing on is, how can I minimize the inputs in order to maximize the outputs? What could I be doing differently? So that might be another useful way of looking at distractions. Distractions reduce your productivity, no doubt about that. So if you avoid distractions, you should find that you're getting out more than you were previously. So how do you do that? Well, you can schedule time. You know what I was saying earlier about chunking time and the like, meeting with friends, they really eat into your time, and you'll probably find that when you do your time management circle. So do specific periods of time which you can set aside to do that, and then you can focus, you can enjoy staying in touch with people. Choose low productivity time for low value activity. So if you know, for example, when you first get up in the morning or after lunch or maybe last thing in the evening, you're not as productive, then that's when you should assign some low value activity to that period of time. You're not wasting it going back over work and perhaps not being able to memorize or focus on it properly. As far as emails go, use your trash, use your archive so that you're not faced with a great massive emails every time you look at them. If you don't want to be disturbed, it's quite okay to say that. You could maybe put a sign on your door or a message on your texts or whatever. Just say, I don't want to be disturbed. This is my study time. That's your prerogative to do that. Have a quiet workspace. Close the door if you possibly can. I know that may not always be possible, especially at home, but do your best. And maintain discipline and energy. And to help you do that, very important, stay hydrated. If you become dehydrated as the day goes on, you'll probably find your energy starts to flag, you lose your focus, and you become, you're not concentrating, you're perhaps losing your motivation, you'll be getting tired. So just remember to keep constantly staying hydrated, preferably just with plain water, and do get enough sleep, because when you're tired, again, your energy flags, and that does really impact on your studies. So motivation, do you remember I said motivation is a really key aspect of study skills? Well, if your motivation is a bit weak, these are the sort of signs you'll probably notice. Finding excuses not to study, very common. I think we all, we're all prone to that occasionally. If we don't really want to get down to something, we'll find excuses. And again, it may be going on the phone or making a phone call or browsing. We think, oh, well, it's useful. I'm doing some research, but actually it's not what you should be doing. You might be losing interest. That's a sign that you're not as motivated as you should be. You might give up quickly. So you get started, but then you lose direction, you lose focus, and you give up. You might have a crisis of confidence. You might be working on something and think, I'm not sure if I can do this, or if what I've done is correct. I think I might be wasting my time. Whatever it is, again, it's not unusual. I think everybody has this from time to time. And the important thing is perhaps just to take a break, step back, maybe step outside your work environment and take some advice, get some support. And you might find when you come back to it, you're feeling more confident again, and you can get back to the task. Becoming easily distracted, as I say, we're all prone to distractions, but as I just shared with you, there are ways to manage that and minimize it. And you might just be feeling bored. I mean, sometimes the work is not as exciting and interesting as you would like, and your attention wanders. We'll look in a moment at some ways in which you can try and introduce a bit of variety and make your study skills, make your approach a little bit more interesting to counteract any boredom. So moving on to the second exercise now, how strong is your motivation? And I'll show you 20 questions now. Again, this exercise, you might have received it already when you registered, but we'll run through it together now. And if you do need a copy, by all means, ask for it. So you need to rate each of the following statements from 1 low to 5 high. And then at the end, there are 20 statements, so you could score a maximum of 100. calculate your total score out of 100. I'd be very surprised if it's anywhere near 100, by the way. But whatever it is, make a note of that. And think about your overall scores, which will tell you something about your general motivation, but also in each specific category or item, depending on whether you've gone from 1 to 5, that may tell you what is causing maybe your lack of motivation, and where you could actually make some improvements. Okay, so I'll read these statements out to you and you will give them a rating from 1 to 5. So you don't need to write a lot of information out, just keep a record of your scores. And again, this is entirely for your own purpose. So 1, I have a strong sense of purpose. Please rate that from 1 to 5. 2, I know my reasons for study. 3, I am clear how my study will benefit my life. 4, I set myself clear targets for completing tasks. 5, I am driven to achieve well. 6, I can get going quickly when I sit down to study. 7, I have strategies for getting myself down to work. 8, I stay focused once I sit down to study. And 9, I always complete work by the deadline. 10, I create the time I need to complete tasks well. So take a moment just to look through all those again if you haven't already completed it, and rate each of those from 1 to 5. So while you're doing that, on the subject of 9, I always complete my work by the deadline. That's a really important aspect of study, particularly when you get to university. You will have lots and lots of assignments, probably which you'll need to do simultaneously, all for different deadlines. So you need to manage that and you need to meet the deadlines. And what you'll find is if you almost always meet the deadline, then you'll get a reputation for reliability and consistency, and your tutor, your professor will acknowledge that. And then if for any reason you're struggling to meet a deadline, as an exceptional case, maybe you've not been well or something's happened in your life, something's gone wrong, you can go to your tutor, to your lecturer and explain. And if you have a good solid reputation, if you normally do complete on time, you'll find they're sympathetic. Whereas if you have a bit of a reputation for always being late, never meeting the deadline, you might not be treated quite so sympathetically. So that's just something to bear in mind. Okay, we're going to move on now to the next 10. Number 11, I set personal challenges that inspire me. I take pleasure in achieving milestones and goals. I study well even when I don't feel like it. I keep going even when times get tough. I give thought to how to keep myself inspired. I find ways to make study sessions enjoyable. I make the subjects I study interesting to me. I avoid actions that might sabotage my study. I use criticism as a spur to doing better. I manage anxieties and crises of confidence. So take a few moments to look at those statements and rate each of them from 1 low to 5 high. Again, the source is Stella Cottrell's Study Skills Handbook. And I'm now going to share with you some top tips for increasing motivation. Number one, it might seem quite obvious, but it's very important this. Choose the right course for you. If you choose a subject that you actually are not that excited to do, you're going to struggle a little bit at university because of the sheer volume of work and the deadlines and the pressure that you will feel yourself under. So think about that when you're choosing the course. And remember, if you come to the UK for university, that will be your major for the 3 or 4 years that you're studying for your degree. So that's a long time if it's a course that you're not completely committed to doing. So I think that's important to be aware of. Set short-term realistic goals and challenges. And I emphasize short-term because obviously you will have longer-term goals. We all do, and it's important to have those. But in terms of study skills and study effectiveness, it's important to have bite-sized goals, goals that you can sort of grasp, they're within sight, and then it's something, you know, that's really going to motivate you. And reward yourself for each success. So each time you finish a chapter or write the first page of an essay or sort of complete an assignment, whatever it is, you can reward yourself. I would say find something that's meaningful to you. Chocolate has its place, that's for sure, but you might want to think about other rewards as well. Develop a structured routine. And this is very important. I mean, you're probably finding this while you're working from home during the lockdown as well. While you're at school, you normally have to arrive at a certain time. The bell rings, you move on to your next class. You have a routine. It's set out for you. Whereas when you're working from home, there's less of a routine. And certainly when you get to university, you will need to develop your own routine. That's very important. Use a variety of techniques to make your learning a little bit more interesting, be more interactive, more creative in the way you learn. I'll give you some ideas on how to do that as we go through the webinar. Find some positive triggers. For example, if you like working in company, maybe find a group of other students you could work with. Try and avoid negative triggers, so people maybe who distract you, who are a little bit negative, who maybe pull you down. Try and avoid those people. And manage your stress. Stress is inevitable. It's part of life. You can't avoid it, but you can manage it. You can set the priorities like we've just discussed so that you don't feel completely overwhelmed. You can see the steps you've got to take over a period of time, and you can mark them off on your calendar. Do exercise. That's an amazing way of managing stress. Really important. I'm sure you're finding that during lockdown, just to be able to stretch, to go outside, to walk the dog, go for a walk if you can, or a run, whatever appeals to you. Do find time to do that every day if you possibly can, but also to relax. And I don't mean necessarily screen time. You might find other ways of relaxing, such as meditation or mindfulness or yoga. There are lots of different ways in which you can manage your stress and relax and then re-energize yourself when you need to get back to work. You can ask a tutor or a friend for motivational support. And it's important to understand how you learn best. And we'll be looking at personal learning styles very shortly. So I hope those are useful. Now, moving on to the next exercise, personal learning style. There are 12 questions, and I will be asking you to answer those in order to evaluate your personal learning style. And the emphasis is on the word personal. It's entirely personal to you. Again, you don't have to share it with anyone. It's for your own benefit, this. In the diagram, you'll see 3 colored circles. One is visual, one is auditory, one is kinesthetic. And the very diagram itself is an example of visual learning. So some people respond best to seeing something like this in color, shapes, maybe on a screen. Other people will learn in a different way. They respond better maybe to data, numbers, lists. So that's part of what we're going to be looking at. So again, this self-evaluation questionnaire should have been shared with you, but if you don't have it, then do ask for it or go back to the webinar recording later. So each category, within each category, please pick those factors you consider help you perform at your best when you're studying. And there may be a few, or there may be a lot. It's very personal to you. So the first category is social. Do you prefer to study on your own, with your friends, with other students, perhaps a mixture? Or maybe it depends on the day or the task. And for each of these, it may depend on the day or the task. That's fine. You can choose that if that's appropriate for you. The second one is input from others. Do you like to motivate yourself, to have your own agenda and work it out for yourself? Or do you like to study with other people, share ideas? Do you need encouragement and support from other people? Do you find that helpful? Or again, does it depend? Third one, external direction. Do you need to be directed? Does that help you to perform at your best? Do you need detailed instructions, lots of guidance, or just a little guidance, some instructions? Or do you prefer to study in your own way and have the freedom to do it without detailed instructions? Do you like choice? A bit of choice, a lot of choice? Again, what suits one person doesn't suit another. What is it that you find works for you? Or does it again depend on what you're doing and when you're doing it? Timing is a key aspect of studying. We've touched on this a little bit already. Do you like to start early? Are you an early bird? You know, are you at your best, really alert first thing in the morning, or does it take you a while to sort of to get into action? Do you find that you've got to sort of build up your pace? Do you like to work late? Or are you a bit of an owl? Do you like to keep up a pace, a good sort of fast pace, and keep working solidly through the day, or are you last minute? I would strongly advise you not to be too last minute, just because you're probably adding to your stress. If you possibly can, try to pace your work through the day. But you know, in terms of your personal learning style, some people are more last minute than others, that's for sure. They just respond better to that pressure, that urgency of having a last minute deadline to meet. But as I say, that doesn't suit everybody. So don't leave it to the last minute if it doesn't suit you to do that. Or is there no fixed pattern? Does it again just maybe depend on what you're doing and when you're doing it? Do you like to study for hours without a break? Again, as you've probably heard me say, I think it's good to have breaks, but some people need more breaks, some people need less breaks. And again, it depends very much on how your mind works as to which suits you better. Do you like to study for a set amount of time? Set yourself the time, stop, have a break, or do you prefer to just work until you complete the task? Or is there no fixed pattern? Do you like to break up the time with different kinds of tasks? Or does it just depend? So have a moment just to look through those 4 different areas and make it on as to which factors are important to your personal learning style. Okay, we'll move on now. So factors, sensory. As I said from that image a couple of slides ago, people learn in using different senses. So some people prefer to learn visually, some prefer to learn by listening, and others like to move around, or a combination of those. So visual means that you respond well to colour, shape, pictures, graphics, watching films, seeing things, different things the way they're laid out on a page or on a screen. If you're a listening learner, then you like listening to broadcasts, lectures, podcasts, recordings of your own voice. I mean, I did a lot of this when I was at university. I recorded what I needed to learn in my own voice, and I listened back to it, particularly before bed, because I firmly believed that would stick in my memory, and I would wake up remembering what I'd listened to. I was studying languages, so I was memorizing a lot of text in foreign languages, which is information, or it may depend. Kinesthetic is about movement. So some people like to move around, just literally walk around while they're talking to themselves or reading something, or maybe run, and again, listen to it on headphones or repeat things to themselves, skipping, jumping. Everybody maybe has different ways of doing things, but if this resonates with you, if you feel you like to move around, that you're not good at just sitting still for long periods of time, it may be that you have a more kinesthetic style of learning. And that's important to recognize and use to your benefit. Making a diagram or a model, that could mean actually physically making something or drawing something or writing it down. Again, or it may depend on the task. Planning. You might be a systematic planner. You might like to have everything really well planned and structured and organized, with very clear priorities and lists. And that's great. If you can do that, if it works for you, I strongly recommend it. If you find that's not your preferred style, that you prefer to go with the flow, or even, as some people would call it, creative chaos, and lots of time just browsing and gathering in any particular plan, at least be aware of that's what you're doing, and you might want to think about whether that's really working for you, and whether it is your personal style of learning, or it's just maybe a habit you've fallen into. Moving on. Some people like to see the big picture, the global picture, we would call it, and then work down into the details. And other people like to see the task broken up, the details of whatever they're researching or reading, and then build that up into the big picture, or move between the two. So that's another aspect of learning that, again, you could have a think about and see which you prefer, which works best for you. Location, we've touched on this already. We don't have a lot of choice about location at the moment, but when you go to university, you might have a bit of choice about where you'll do your learning, particularly your independent private study time. So do you like to be on campus, perhaps with other students at hand, the cafe, the library, or within reach, or do you prefer to be in a quiet place at home or in your room? Do you perhaps like to move around between different places, inside and outside, or does it just depend? Noise. Now, this is a key one, and people have very different views on this. Some people like to work in total silence. Some people like to have music playing or even TV in the background. I have heard students telling me that with the TV on, that blocks out other distractions, which I personally really cannot understand, because if I have the TV on, I really do not focus at all on the task. And in fact, I could only have music on if it's very low value activity, perhaps browsing or something like that. I prefer to work in total silence. That's when I am most productive. But I do recognize people work in different ways. So have a think about that, and don't just assume because you've got used to having the TV in the background or music on that works best for you. As I say, it may just again be a habit that you've acquired. Light. Light might not be something you think about, but it could be a question of making sure you have a lamp that is giving you good light in your working area, that you're able to see everything clearly. Some people prefer maybe to have their screen as their main light and have a dim light around them in the room. Or again, does it just depend on the day or the task? Do you prefer indoor light or maybe natural light? That might be another thing to think about. And medium. Do you like things to be on paper? Do you like to write and read a physical document, or electronic, a digital version on screen? Or again, does it just depend on what you're doing, or on the particular time of day? And there may well be other factors. These are just the ones that are most sort of commonly considered, but there may be other factors that characterize the way you work best. So again, take a few minutes to look at this screen and the different elements on it, and make a note, if you like, of the ones that jump out at you and you think, yes, that's what helps me to learn best. Okay, we're going to move on now. And as I say, if you want to have a look at this exercise again, you can ask for the document, the word document, to go through it in your leisure. Now then, we're moving on to academic reading. We'll also be looking at listening and writing skills as well. But in terms of academic reading, as you'll see from the little picture here, it can be quite overwhelming when you get to university. There can be a lot of reading to do. It depends on the subject you're taking. Particularly if you're doing a humanities subject, you'll find you're spending an awful lot of time reading texts. And your time is limited, so you really do need to read efficiently. And a couple of tips here. Scanning a document or scanning a book means that you're looking through it very quickly for specific things, so maybe specific phrases or words that tie in with the piece of work that you're doing, to see whether it's relevant, to see if there are particular chapters or pages that will be helpful in your work. Skim reading means more getting the overview, so maybe looking at the chapter headings, the diagram captions, the index, the bibliography, and getting an overview of the document. But they're just two slightly different ways of reading parts of a book or parts of a document rather than trying to do it from beginning to end, which is what takes an awful lot of time, because you need to narrow down, first of all, what's going to be most useful for you for the particular assignment or task that you're doing. This one is important. Take the reference details down before you start reading. Sometimes it's easy to forget, move on, and then actually forget later on where you acquired a particular piece of information. And when we come to look at plagiarism, you'll see how important it is to take a note of any quotations that you're lifting from the work that you're doing, and make sure you put them in quotation marks and make a complete note of where you've been able to get this information, whether it's in a book, an article, a document, or a website. Take down the details so that you've got that readily available when you go back to it. Check that the material you're reading is current, original, and accurate. There's nothing worse than sort of getting halfway through something and then realizing that it's not the most recent edition, for example. So make sure you've got the most recent up-to-date version. Maybe do a little bit of background reading on the document itself to make sure it is up-to-date and accurate, that the author hasn't been perhaps discredited in some way, or that the research or whatever it is that you're reading about hasn't been overtaken perhaps by more recent material. So that's important. And try not to read the less relevant material, just focus on what is relevant. You might get a little bit sidetracked, you might find something interesting and spend longer than you need to reading it. But as I say, you need to read efficiently because time is limited. So try and focus on what is most relevant to you. Read critically and with a purpose, and you'll hear this word from me a lot. If you've joined in any of my previous webinars, you'll have heard me talking, for example, about critical thinking. And it doesn't mean criticizing, it really just means coming to the task, whether it's reading or thinking or writing, with a questioning mind, applying your thinking skills, asking questions, evaluating, analysing the information, not just taking it at face value, but really going into it, what the meaning of it is and what your feelings about it are, whether you agree, disagree, and why, and so on. And that's the kind of reading that is required, the kind of academic critical reading that's required, particularly at university level. Highlight important points during your first reading. You might want to go back and read something in more depth, but highlight the important material first and take some notes systematically. Mind mapping is a good way of doing it, and we'll have a look at that in a moment if you're not familiar with it. After each section, try and recall what you've read. It's very easy sometimes just to keep reading, and after a while, you're almost blind to what you're seeing. You're kind of losing focus. So after each section, maybe each chapter, whatever seems like a logical break, just stop and actually kind of go back in your own mind or go over your notes and just recap or recall on what you've read. So this is a useful note-taking tool. This is actually a mind map. And you start in the middle. If you haven't done one before, they're very easy. It's a kind of a doodle with a purpose. So you're starting in the middle and you're using colour, symbols, lines, shapes, ideas to take notes and show, how they connect as you perceive it. And the important thing is that it's meaningful for you, and that when you go back to look at it, it helps you to recall what you've learned or what you've seen or read. So it's an example of a visual technique. A spider diagram is another one. A spider diagram is very similar to a mind map, but it tends to be a little bit more simple. So it's kind of circles and lines and a little bit less color. So all of this is a good way of making your study and your learning process a little bit more interesting and more creative. And particularly if that's your personal style of learning, to learn visually, you might find that it's a good way of actually committing information to memory. I know when my daughter was doing her history at GCSE, she was really struggling to remember dates and facts and battles and people's names and everything. And she decided to start sort of writing things down in different colours. And she said she did actually find that that worked for her. And when she got into an exam, she could physically remember the colour red meant this date, this battle, this person. My mind doesn't work that way. But again, if it's something that works for you, give it a go. Break down your information into manageable chunks. It enhances creativity and problem solving. Shows how everything connects and fits together. Sorry, go back. And it's a good way for you to review and remember information. Okay, moving on to academic listening. It's a similar process, but it's auditory rather than reading. Listening to lectures, taking part in supervisions, tutorials, seminars. In Cambridge, we call them supervisions, but tutorials are the same thing. Sitting together with some students in a room, usually guided by your lecturer or professor in the subject, going over maybe a piece of work you've been asked to do, or a question you've been asked to answer, or a problem you've had to solve. It depends very much on the subject you're studying. And you're listening hard to what's going on. Another example of listening is when you're receiving feedback. The skills you need for academic listening, you won't be surprised to hear: concentration, effective note-taking, and to do it in a critical way. So again, in terms of critical listening, it's about questioning and about evaluating what you're hearing, and not just sort of letting it wash over you. Really think about what it is you're listening and hearing. Okay, speaking is another example of the same thing, really. So as I say, you could be taking part in a group discussion, or perhaps even giving a presentation or a lecture, taking part in a debate. This is very popular, particularly in UK universities. The Cambridge Union, which is the Cambridge University Debating Society, is the oldest in the world. And if you're interested in that, it's a great way of kind of developing your speaking skills and your critical thinking and listening skills as well. Academic speaking is the language of discussion and argument, and by that we don't mean having a sort of verbal fight. It's much more about applying logic when you're speaking, disagreeing respectfully, giving reasons for your viewpoint, and understanding other people's viewpoints as well. A little bit of a word about academic vocabulary. I know you all speak and write English extremely well, but I do work with people from many different countries with different standards of English, and some do struggle with academic vocabulary. It's worth just mentioning that academic vocabulary can be a little bit different from words in everyday use, and something to remember is that actually there are not that many academic words or word families which are very different from the everyday language that we use in English. English is a language that has a lot of words, probably twice as many as the next language, which is German, which does make English quite a difficult language to become really fluent in. But in terms of academic vocabulary, Avril Coxhead, who was a researcher at a New Zealand university, in fact, she examined hundreds and hundreds of academic text and pulled out the common words. Which are the kinds of words in academic texts that just keep cropping up time and again. And she came up with 570 head words. Those mean sort of families of words, which translates into 3,000 different words relating to those families. So for example, abstract might be the family word. And then within that family, you've got nouns, adverbs, plural, singular, abstraction, abstractions, and so on. So it's not actually that many words. So don't be worried about academic vocabulary. That's really what I'm saying here. Even the most unusual words that you haven't come across before can be learned, and there are not that many of them. And you'll just find that you naturally pick them up as you go through university. Academic writing. At university, you'll be mainly writing essays. You might be writing a report, particularly if you're doing science and lab work and experiments and things like that. You might be having to write factual, data-driven reports. But even with science subjects, you'll find you're writing a lot of essays. And that's how universities tend to mark the work, is based on your essays. So what do universities expect essays to show? Well, first and foremost, up-to-date knowledge and understanding of the subject. Also, though, the ability to express your ideas rationally, to come up with a good line of reasoning, a coherent argument, using well-documented evidence, and to have the ability to design research. That could be internet research, or it could be proper academic research, lab research, depends on the subject you're doing, and the ability to reference your sources correctly. We'll come back to that shortly. To evaluate lines of reasonings and flaws in others' arguments. So that's a key part of most essay writing, is comparing, contrasting, looking at different authors, and actually weaving those into a line of argument or a line of reasoning within your essay, saying where you agree, where you disagree, and why. And to do that, obviously, you have to be able to reflect on how you think and also how other people think. So academic writing, you'll be working to word limits, and I'm sure you're all used to doing that, and to deadlines. So for example, when you come to write your personal statement, which is a form of essay, you know that there is a character limit that you've got to work to there, and a deadline you've got to meet. It's very similar to that in university. You will use an appropriate academic style, so no kind of slang or colloquial language. It's quite formal. You will need to answer the question and not waffle, not sort of talk too much around the question. Structure your work clearly, logically. Avoid repetition, because that's difficult to follow. You want the reader, who in this case is going to be your tutor, your lecturer, your director of studies, to be able to very quickly follow your line of argument and see how you've gone about structuring your essay, and whether it's well argued and well evidenced. And the best way to do that is to structure your work clearly and logically. You'll apply a process of writing, and I'll explain what I mean about that very shortly. Apply critical thinking to your writing, as you do to any aspect of your work at university in particular. Ideally, assess 3 or more sources and refer to these in your writing, and aim to be clear, concise, well organised. And always focus on the academic purpose. So refer back to the question you're being asked to write about. Typically, it'll be a for or against kind of argument essay, or compare and contrast, or to what extent, or reflect on. These are typically the kind of phrases you'll find you're being asked to use when you write an essay. So make sure that's what you do. That's the academic purpose of the writing. So how do we structure an essay? Very simply, an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Don't try and include too many points per sentence. Ideally, focus on one key point per sentence, a big idea per paragraph, because again, that's where you'll get your logical flow, your line of reasoning, and make it easy to read. And do support what you're saying with evidence. So refer to specific authors or texts or books, podcasts, it could be anything, as long as it's something you have personally researched and that you can reference in your document. The writing process. You'll start by planning. It's very important that rather than just get stuck in, you actually figure out how you're going to plan your essay, and then brainstorm it. What do I already know? Where can I go for the information? Then actually do the research and the reading, as much as you need to do. Then start outlining the key sort of headings and the key structure of your essay. You'll write a first draft, you'll edit it, further drafts until you're happy that you've got everything you want the way you want it, And then it's check and proofread. Very, very important. You might need to get a second opinion on that, because if you've worked on it, you tend to visually see what you think is there because you've looked at it so much. So maybe get a second person to have a look at that and proofread it. Don't rely on the spell check. I always say that with any piece of writing. It's not foolproof. And then you'll have the final version. That's the writing process. And writing critically, as I say, you'll know this, I think, by now, is about not accepting the conclusions of other writers without evaluating their arguments and evidence. It's about taking a balanced view. So don't be overly negative or overly positive. It's a balanced view. What would you accept and why, or what would you treat with caution and why? What's the evidence that you're basing that on? And do make a clear presentation of your own arguments. Now, what is plagiarism? This is important, so pay attention. If you're drifting off now, if you're falling asleep, this is the time to wake up, because this is really important. According to the Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, plagiarism means copying another person's ideas, words, or work and pretending they are your own. And note there, ideas as well as words. Plagiarism is an act of fraud. It involves both stealing someone else's work and lying about it afterwards. Okay, now universities treat plagiarism really seriously. If you're preparing your application for university, you'll know this already, because if UCAS, through its software, picks up something you've copied or lifted from the internet or from somebody else, that's a form of plagiarism. And you might find that your personal statement is rejected because of that. There are very severe consequences when you get to university if you're found to have plagiarized, to have copied someone's work and tried to pass it off as your own. It may be unintentional, it may not have been deliberate, but unfortunately, it still is taken very seriously. You'll tend to normally be interviewed to give your side of the story if there is one. They try to be fair, but the reality is you could face suspension, and you could even face expulsion from the university. And I do unfortunately know one student that happened to. It wasn't entirely her fault, it was unintentional, and she was facing a lot of difficult circumstances in her life, but she broke the rules, and unfortunately she did not receive her degree at the end of her studies. So it is something you've really got to be aware of. If in doubt, just don't do it. And here is how to avoid plagiarism. Effective note-taking to start with, that's most important. As I said before, if you're using a quote, if you're taking straight quote from another person's work, make sure when your notes that you put quotation marks around it so that you remember that that's an actual quotation. Even if it's not a direct quote, even if it's just an idea, you've still got to reference it to the original author. So within the body of your work, you might be saying something like, as to quote from AB, okay, that would be in inverted commas, but also as noted by X or according to Y may not be in inverted commas because you're putting it into your own words, but you do have to give the credit to the original author. And even if you paraphrase, that means put it into your own words, you still have to cite the source. Bear that in mind. Use the correct referencing convention for your subject and faculty. You'll find each university will have maybe a slightly different way of doing this. The most commonly used referencing system is the Harvard. It's called the Harvard referencing system. And that's what most universities use, but there are many others, and you do need to just be clear on which one you're expected to use. But typically it will have the name, like this, of the author or authors, the year in brackets, the title of the work, usually in italics, whether it's a particular edition of that work, the city, the publisher, and maybe pages or chapters. And the reason for doing this is that whoever reads your essay can go straight to that piece of work and check what it was in the original that you have referred to, that you have referenced. Okay, moving on. I'm going to share with you now the 7-point revision action plan. And this is also in the studyskillshandbook.co.uk, all freely available for you to find. Firstly, positive state of mind, very, very important. Whatever's going on, however much you're struggling perhaps to keep your momentum, Just keep on going, work on your motivation, use some of those techniques that we talked about earlier, and give yourself positive messages, encouraging messages, and do keep things in perspective, whether it's exams or assignments. You will live to study another day. Time, give yourself enough time to go over your work, to organize your work. If you find yourself making excuses, deal with those. If you have spare time, you know, say, for example, you have 30 minutes between lectures, make sure you've always got something with you, maybe in electronic form, that you can actually use that time, maybe go and have a coffee and read over some notes, use the time that you've got. Variety. This is all about keeping up momentum and interest. So short spells, lots of different ways of going over your material. Some of those techniques like mind mapping or different ways of noting the material would be helpful here. Something that Stella Cottrell talks about is overlearning and active learning in a positive sense. And what that really means is when you're going back over your notes, find ways to kind of reinforce what you've learned and aid your recall. So that might mean rewriting some of the key notes. I wouldn't recommend you write screens of notes because that just takes too much time, but maybe some of the key points, or use flashcards with some of the key elements or bullet points, memory triggers, again, whatever works for you. Practice. When you're revising, it's great to do some practice papers if you can get hold of them, some past questions. Do them under exam conditions, timed conditions. You may find that you run out of time the first time, but when you do a couple of practice papers, you'll speed up because you'll begin to get familiar with the format, and you'll realize, I'm really quick in this area, but I need more time for these sorts of questions, and you'll adapt accordingly. People, you might like to revise with others if that works for you, or find some support, ask for help. Just if you're floundering, don't struggle on your own. There are people who can help you. And select wisely. So what will I revise? Sometimes you just cannot cover everything, not in the level of detail that you might like to. So for example, you could go back over past papers and see which of the questions which most commonly come up, and make sure you definitely cover those, and then go on and do whichever other topics and questions you have time to do. You can find that whole revision action plan again on studyskillshandbook.co.uk if you want to go back and revisit that. And I would leave you with this thought about study skills. It is daunting, it is a challenge for you, but it's also a massive opportunity for you to make your mark and really come into your own and step up a gear. So my advice would be, take charge. It's your life, it's your future, it's what you want to achieve and where you want to go in life. So particularly when you go on to university, think of it as an opportunity for you to do what works best for you. Try and understand what is expected of you. And if you're not sure, ask. Set some goals and keep track of them. Do develop your study strategies and skills along the lines that we've covered in this webinar. Don't wait to be told. You'll find when you get to university that no one will be sort of watching you and waiting and hanging on your every sort of breath and question. You have to take the initiative. So if there's something you don't understand, if you're something that you feel you haven't been sort of properly briefed about, find out, go and ask the question, and just do that. Don't wait for someone to notice or to ask you, because there are, you know, most universities are very big. There are lots of students, and the teachers, the lecturers, they are busy people. As well as teaching you, they will probably be doing their research, they'll be writing books, they'll be getting articles published. So they have, you know, a lot of work to do. They're not like your teacher primarily just teaching you, they're doing other stuff as well. And don't wait for opportunities, create them for yourself. This is a great opportunity, you know, for you to shape things the way you want to. And actually, universities expect that and they value that. And it's something, as you're preparing to apply for university, you might want to take on board and keep in mind as well that as you're preparing your application, maybe going for an interview, writing your personal statement, the students who tend to get on best, in my experience, are the ones who do take the initiative, look for opportunities, do the further reading, find areas of interest that they can incorporate, maybe look for work experience opportunities and use their initiative. And you'll find, you know, that is appreciated. The university staff, the admission staff, they really do appreciate that. So it's worth the effort. Here are some useful sources of information. The Study Skills Handbook, as you've heard from me many times. The British Council has lots of interesting information on its website about writing in particular, academic writing. Cambridge University has a whole section on referencing if you're unsure about that and you want to read about it, also about study skills in general. And the last two websites here are about sort of physical and mental health. And mental health is very important for students. It's quite a big step up to go to university. It is challenging, and with the best will in the world, there may be things that you struggle with and you need some help with. So don't wait, you know, get the help if you need to. And that's one starting point if you need to. I'm very quickly going to introduce Cambridge Dream and then we'll have some questions and answers. So it's a summer programme in Cambridge for 13 to 18-year-olds, British and international, taught by Cambridge lecturers, mentored by Cambridge graduates, so students actually at the university doing undergraduate or postgraduate degrees, and you'll be learning inside and outside the classroom. It's a very exciting, interesting programme. If you're 15 to 18, you do an advanced academic studies programme, which covers a lot of the things that I have been discussing today. Leadership skills for 13 to 14-year-olds. So if you're not quite at the stage where you're really thinking about university applications, but you want to develop the skills and understand a bit more about university applications, this is a STEAM-based course that's very interesting and exciting for our younger students. These are our subject choices. Everybody gets to choose a major, a subject that they can focus on during the course, and they'll be getting specialist tuition and projects related to this subject. And these are the dates and the fees. So this year, 26th of July to 8th of August, we're keeping our fingers crossed that we'll be out of this crisis, out of the lockdown. We're expecting some announcements this weekend from our Prime Minister, and we're hoping we're going to begin to see the easing of the lockdown here. But we realise, obviously, every country is different and there may still be travel restrictions and other factors we have to take into account. But all being well, we'll go ahead with the course. That's the fee. There are scholarships for GEM students worth 25%. And you can apply if you wish to. You can still apply for that. And there are details on our website to do that. So, that's the end of my PowerPoint presentation. See if I can find you all. There you are. Is anybody out there? Okay, so some good questions here. Let me go through those. Thank you very much. Great. So thank you for working between yourselves as well to sort out that mic problem. That's brilliant. I love that. That's really helpful. Okay, so yes, it's a summer school, and at the moment, the university is saying they expect everything to go back as normal at the end of June. So that means we should be able to run the course in July. But as you know, everything is up on hold at the moment. It's a very difficult time. And it's affecting everybody in lots of different ways. Okay, question about if I paraphrase my work but don't cite the sources. I would say at university level, you are expected to cite the source if you paraphrase the work. It's a little bit different in school, maybe not quite so rigorous, but when you get to university, referencing is taken very seriously. And even if you put something in your own words, the idea, the original idea or concept has come from another author. And it's all about attributing work to the original author, not trying in any way to pass it off as your own. It's seen as academic integrity, and that's very important. When authors write something, they want to know that that will always be their piece of work, that will always be attributed to them, and that's really the whole purpose of referencing. So any other questions, anybody? I realize if you have to leave, that's absolutely fine, but if anybody has any questions and they want to ask, I can respond to emails. Is that what you're asking, Shravan? Oh, I see. This is in terms of sort of time management. I understand. Okay. I would say, you remember what I was saying about urgent and important? You have to sort of balance the two. So if something is urgent but not important, but you've got something you absolutely have to do, then you need to balance the two, and maybe just set some time aside at lunchtime or at a break time to respond to that urgent email if you think it's going to interfere and distract you from your work. Does that answer your question? Anything else? So you'd like to have a look at how to avoid distraction and academic listening slides again. Okay. Would that be helpful? Shall we have a look at those? How to avoid distraction and academic, what was it again? Academic listening. I'm going to do that first. Let me see if I can find that first. So that was the academic listening. These are the situations where you would need to be doing listening to lectures, supervisions, tutorials, receiving feedback. And the skills you need are the same really for all aspects of study skills. You need to be able to concentrate on what you're listening to, take effective notes, and question and evaluate what you're listening to, so that you really get lots of meaning and understanding from it. You can record if you haven't got time to write lots of notes. Sometimes lecturers are quite happy for you to record their lectures, or you can listen to them after the event. Some universities record all lectures and some will only record some lectures. Distractions, was that the other one? I'm just trying to remember. How to avoid distraction. Okay. So that was the cost of distraction, and this is how to avoid distraction. So schedule time. The question about the urgent email. I mean, sometimes you just have to do things. That's a fact. And if it's really important and urgent, then do it. But usually you can find another time a bit later on in a break to do things like emails. Get to know your own kind of high points and low points in the day, when you're most productive, when you're least productive, and again, try and time what you're doing for those periods. Don't use your high productivity time to get distracted on non-urgent or non-important activity. That's the most important aspect of this, I think. Okay.
Hello there.
Hello. Hi. Just going to go back to the screen. Who am I speaking to?
You are, just a second.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Thank you for the presentation. It was amazing. I have a short question. Let's say that you were caught for plagiarism, like unintentional plagiarism. How does the university deal with that?
Okay. In my experience, every university is different. Some are very strict, very, very strict, and it may even be an automatic suspension from the year. Others, they may just downgrade your mark or give you a 0 for that particular paper or ask you to resit it at another time. I think it depends on the institution itself, and I suppose the nature of the plagiarism, you know, how severe it was, whether you took a whole paragraph perhaps out of someone's work and passed it off as your own. I mean, it'd be difficult to do that unintentionally. But if you just forgot a reference or you didn't put it in quotation marks when it should have been, you would be interviewed. It would be part of a discussion, and hopefully, if they accept your explanation, you would just get a bit of a slap on the wrist and told not to do it again. But I think my advice would be just be very careful. Keep it in your mind the whole time. And when you're taking your notes, in particular, take note of when you're pulling someone's idea or a quotation. That's key, you know, to what you're writing. And that you keep a record of that.
Let's say I've gotten an idea from a book which I read like a long time ago, and I forgot the name of the book, I forgot the name of the author, and I wish to implement that idea into my essay or into my research. What should I do about that?
If it was me, I would probably do a little bit of browsing to see if I could track down that original author. With any luck, you could actually find it again. There is a case for putting something in your work that's generally known. Okay, it's accepted that some ideas, some concepts are just generally known, generally accepted. You know, dogs bark. You know, that's not a very good example, but you know what I mean. That's not something you'd ever have to attribute to anybody. It's really when you get into the more academic aspects of someone's work, I think you will know. You know, you would know yourself. Someone has gone to the trouble of researching and writing this, so I should attribute it to them. Okay. I think it's one of those things, it's very difficult to give you hard and fast rules about the whole thing. I always raise it though when I'm giving this presentation because of that one student I had who failed to get a degree. And she did a very stupid thing. She was ill at the time, going through a really bad time, and fell behind in her work. And with a fellow student, actually copied something as a bit of a shortcut, which was discovered. And it wasn't, you know, even terribly central. It probably wouldn't have affected her mark that much. But the very fact that she did it was enough, unfortunately. And what the university said was that if she'd gone to somebody first and said, I'm struggling, put her hand up and said, I've got a real problem here, I've been ill, I'm falling behind, they would have extended the deadline. But because she had actually committed this offence, they couldn't break the rules for her. You know, the rules are there for a purpose, and unfortunately there was no leeway. So the lesson from that is, if you're ever really struggling or unsure, like in that case about should I include the author for this idea, confer. Go and ask your lecturer, your teacher, and say, look, this is the situation. Should I just leave it out, or, you know, is there a way of getting around this? What would you expect me to do? Okay. Now, the other thing to remember is it gets stricter as you go up the system. So masters and postgraduate students have to be extremely strict. I think as an undergraduate, you know, it's accepted, particularly in the first year, you don't really know what you're doing yet. So you can go and ask for advice, you can get help, you can ask a question. Yes. And when I said about you not getting much supervision, it's in comparison to school. You can still go to people and ask questions, but they won't be sitting in a classroom waiting for you to ask a question. You'd have to make more of an effort to track them down and, you know, send a question to them, email them, or whatever you have to do.
Okay.
Go on.
And To my understanding, the GPA requirements for Cambridge University is 3.7. Is that right? Or
I can't actually comment on that, I'm afraid. I don't know the answer to that one. What was your purpose of asking?
I was I wanted to know if the Cambridge University is flexible. Let's say our GPA is not as high, but our extracurricular activities like our clubs, our other things we are much more involved. And I wanted to know if they are flexible enough to, look over that, but see that, okay, we are involved in these things and let us in. But I mean, I still have one more year to go, so I'm fine. But
Very
I
good.
just wanted to know.
Are you looking at the US as well as the UK?
I'm open to any.
All right, because I would say it's more the case for US universities that they will take these other sort of activities and skills and extracurricular activities into account, the non-academic ones, I mean. For Cambridge, obviously it's in the top 5 in the world, so it is extremely difficult to get into. And what they mainly look for are academic grades. So which curriculum are you following?
GEMS American Academy.
That's why I'm not so familiar with it. I mean, they will accept most examinations from most countries, Cambridge will, but they do say you need to be in the top 1 or 2% of what they call the gathered field. That means the people who are entering that year for that subject. So that gives you an idea where you need to be for somewhere like Cambridge, really at the top level. Whatever your grade or scores you've got, you need to be thinking, am I in that sort of top 1 or 2% of the people who would be applying in this year for that subject? In terms of extracurricular or supracurricular, which is the other way of looking at it, what that means is going beyond or further than the curriculum. That's really what a University of Cambridge, like Cambridge, is looking for. So it's not so much things like competing sports at a top level. That's interesting, but it won't necessarily overcome a grade issue. The grades are number one. But given that most people applying to Cambridge have the top grades, then what you need to be doing to add to your application are things like further reading, so going beyond the curriculum in the areas of interest to you relating to the subject you're thinking of applying for. Do you know which subject you would be applying for?
Business and economics.
Okay. So within business and economics, for Cambridge, for example, it would be economics at undergraduate level and business at post master's level, MBA level. So it'd be economics for Cambridge, for example. Read some really good authors or watch podcasts or whatever floats your boat really in economics. Read The Economist magazine, that's a really good one, or get it online. And find out which area of economics you're particularly interested in. Is it macro, micro, or business for that matter? What is it you're really interested in? And do a bit more research in that area. If you can get a bit of work experience or volunteering, that helps. Not essential, but all helps. And it's about standing out from the crowd because so many people have these good grades. But the other thing I would say is Cambridge and Oxford are fantastic universities, as are, the Ivy League universities in the US. But there are many other absolutely fantastic universities as well. So even if you're not in that really top percent, I would say just spread your net a little bit wider. So for example, in the UK, you've got all the Russell Group universities, which are what are known as, the top academic universities, 20+ universities. So you can have a look at their website, Russell Group, and you can study anywhere from St Andrews and Edinburgh in Scotland to Wales to all over England, Ireland even. There's so many fantastic universities. And also, even with a subject like economics, you want to look at the detail of what's covered in the economics degree, because economics at Cambridge is very different, for example, to economics at LSE, London School of Economics, or Manchester. Some of them will have more of a business bias. in Cambridge, it's pure economics. It's really for the people who love economics as a pure subject, not really so much applied to business. But in other universities like Warwick, you can do very much a combined sort of business economics degree. I don't want to get into too much detail because obviously, you know, that's something that's perhaps of less interest to everyone else. So do your research, ask around, go on the website. You can contact the universities themselves if you've got questions. But if you want to kind of add to your grades, then I would make the extra things as academic as you possibly can relating to the subject that you're applying for. The other things that you can put in your personal statement or your personal essay, which are non-academic, just make sure you're bringing out what you've gained, whether it's skills or sort of experience that's relevant for your degree. What's going to make you a better student?
What kind of skills do the universities think, oh, okay, this person stands out compared to the other person's skill?
Right.
What are the like main exceptional skills?
I've done a couple of webinars previously, which you might be able to listen to as recordings for GEMS on your My Path to Uni website. But just in summary, they are skills relating to critical thinking. So I've touched on that in this one. Which is about evaluating, analysis, reflecting, critical thinking, good communication skills, and creativity, actually thinking for yourself, coming up with your own ideas. That's important. Leadership and teamwork, they'll be looking for that as well. But I would say out of all of those, critical thinking is the one that the top universities like Cambridge are going to be testing you on most. How does your brain work? How do you process your ideas? So when you go for an interview, the questions you get will be very much geared to testing your powers of thinking. You remember I said there is no right or wrong answer often. It's very true. There isn't just one answer, and they won't say to you, well, that's the wrong answer. What they're really interested in is how you tackle the question, how you go about it, how you'd make an educated guess, and from there, keep working on it until you arrive at the solution, asking questions, gathering information. That's the one big skill I would say that you could develop that would make a difference. And being able to articulate that, you know, to be able to put that into words. Do you know the phrase thinking aloud? That summarizes it really. How do you think aloud? So somebody asks you a question and you don't know where to start. Where do I begin? But you have to say something. So get into the habit of where do I start? How can I begin? Have a listen to, if you can get hold of the recording, have a listen to the Creative and Critical Thinking podcast webinar, the one I did for GEMS about a week ago.
Sure, so, I will get in contact. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Does anybody else want to ask a question, or have we all gone now? Have we finished?
Good evening, Miss. I'm Shreya. I study in Dubai. Thank you so much for your lovely presentation. I wish to pursue mathematics and statistics in the future, and I wish to then move on to like data analytics, data sciences. I just wanted to know if unis like Oxford and Cambridge would require me to do, say, physics for A levels. I do not have any other sciences, so I've taken math, further math, computer science, economics. So I want to know, is physics really necessary? Because I have it for my AS levels, but I'm not very passionate about physics as a subject. So if I would like to pursue math, statistics, and, you know, in specific, do I need to take physics for my A levels?
Okay. Well, just as a general comment, I mean, those subjects you're taking fit really well together, don't they? And they do seem to lead into the area that you want to study at undergraduate level. The best thing you can do, rather than me give you a kind of a standard answer, because it does vary a little bit for each faculty and each university, is go on the university website, go on the faculty section within the university website. So for example, there'll be a faculty of mathematics, there'll be a faculty of economics, and it will actually specifically list for you the subject requirements for that degree at A level. If you're doing AS and A level, yeah. So for A level, it will say which combination of subjects are required, and if there is a specified subject that you need to do. For example, If you do economics, you must do maths, and ideally further maths at Cambridge. It's incredibly maths based, and you would struggle otherwise to do economics as a degree.
Yeah, for the course it says that math and further math are required, but then I was just wondering if I would be at a disadvantage if I do not take physics, because a lot of universities need like say one science. So I wanted it was like a mandatory requirement for such, top tier universities.
I know for some subjects, like medicine, for example, you need several sciences and you definitely need chemistry. What I would say is there's usually a bit of flexibility, and unless it's specified. So go on the website, the Cambridge University website, and look at the subject requirements for applying at undergraduate degree level. It's all very clearly set out, so you'd get a definite answer. And have you got a short list of universities? Have you worked out which are the other ones that you want to apply to?
Yep, I have, and most of them require me to do further math and math, but it doesn't really mention anything about the other subjects. Yeah. So just wanted to, clear that out.
Okay, I mean, as a rule, if it doesn't specify it, it's not required. What you can do if you're worried is actually contact the university admissions office. So Cambridge admissions office, okay, closed at the moment, unfortunately, due to coronavirus, which is awful. But normally they will answer that sort of question, or they'll put you in touch with somebody who can answer it. These are typically questions that they do get asked, and it's fine to make direct contact. There'll be an email address there for the admissions office for you to ask that sort of question. I understand what you're saying. It may not be a requirement, but would it set you at a disadvantage? And I think it's good that you're asking this question. It is important to get a feel for that. I think that's the best way to go about it, is to make direct contact with the universities themselves and talk that through with the admissions office.
All right, Miss. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you, Shreya. Anybody else have a question there? Would participating in a summer program help with admission? Does it provide credits? It doesn't, unfortunately, because that's kind of not the British system. If it was America, it would provide credits, but for UK universities, there's no such thing. It will help you prepare and get the skills, and you'll do the practice, you'll do personal statement writing, practice interviews, practice admissions tests, so it'll give you lots of practical help in that way. But just the fact that you've attended would not automatically kind of push you up the scale in terms of applications or give you any credits. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. But I mean, everybody who comes in the summer program does say how useful it is, and how later on, after they've applied and got into their university, they come back to me and say, that they did find it really useful. And especially because they're being taught by lecturers at the university, and also they're with mentors from undergraduates and master's students, all living in the same college together in the summer, eating together, socializing in study as well. And it's a great opportunity to find out from the students themselves in the subject you're thinking of applying for, because you would be matched up with a student in that subject to find out the precise kind of inside track, I suppose. What's it like to apply for this subject? What kind of questions do you get asked? What did you find most helpful? Which books did you read? What's it like being a student of economics at Cambridge University? What have you covered? What have you found difficult? All these things that it's hard to find out any other way. You do have a chance to find out from someone who's actually studying there. Does that help? Any other questions? Is everybody happy? Okay, well, if everybody's ready to finish, we'll finish at that point. But if you want to contact me, you can go on the Cambridge Dream website, and there's a contact us button on there, or if you want to email me, that's fine, or find out any more about the programme. And good luck to you all, whatever lies ahead of you, and I hope it all works out. for you. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you for your great questions. Bye-bye.